the legal Slack channel, and Tony will repeat them in here. So with that, take it away, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Hi, everyone here in the room, and as well who is connected here over the audio. We'll try to make this as interesting as possible. We're just here to give you guys an overview of what you need to be thinking about when you're starting a new company, and especially from the business formation standpoint. We're from Davis, Graham & Stubbs here in Denver, full service business law firm. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is also at our startup website. If you guys want to refer to some information, we have some helpful information at our website. That's dgs-up.com. And as you'll see, we represent folks from startup to grown up. And so we're trying to share some experiences with you guys so you can start thinking about what you may be doing in the event you form a business coming out of this challenge, or to the extent just going through life and forming other businesses. So the first thing we'll just kind of highlight, if you can take anything away from this presentation, the main things are you really want to avoid some simple mistakes that we often see when either clients form a business without any sort of legal advice, or they sometimes just don't get the proper advice. The first thing is obviously not forming an entity. You always want to form an entity because that limits your liability. You want to keep everything separate from your personal assets, and so you want to have the business run through the company that you form, whatever form it is, and we'll get into that here later on in the presentation. So you never want to sign anything individually. You never want to put your personal assets up. You want everything to come to the company, and all assets should reside in the company. Not respecting the difference between an entity and an individual. So we see it all the time. Oh, I went out and formed a limited liability company at the Colorado Secretary of State. You know, that's great. Filed articles of organization. It's there. I'm great. But, oh, I've been entering in all these contracts as an individual. So they're signing personally. They're not signing as a member or a president of their company. They're running all funds of the company through their personal bank accounts. But that could get you in trouble later on for what we'll explain here in a bit. I know the WilmerHale folks were here yesterday talking about intellectual property, but you need probably sign any sort of IP rights into the company. They shouldn't be held by individual employees or owners of that company. And then the other piece is when you're bringing on capital, to the extent you're not able to bootstrap it or get debt to fund your operations during the early stages, you want to be careful that you don't grant too much equity and not implementing proper founder or owner vesting. So here's what we're going to kind of walk through. We're going to first walk through choice of entity. We'll briefly discuss the formation process. We'll talk about owners' agreements under each of the structures that we'll talk about. And then we'll just briefly talk about some additional things you need to think about when starting a new company. So we'll first get into the major considerations, and I'll ask here Zach and John to jump in here and talk about some of the things we need to be thinking about here.
Yeah, so this is Zach Detra. It's good to talk to everyone here today. Yes?
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
I'm from Washington, not from Colorado. How is this specific to Colorado versus universal across different states?
Okay, so just to repeat the question is how much of this is Colorado specific and how much is applicable to people from other states? And the answer is that this is applicable to anyone. Yeah, so this is not state specific. You'll go through these issues in any state. And you know, each state kind of has its own code and statute that's applicable to corporations or LLCs in that state. So you'll need to be mindful of those, but this is generally broad information. Okay. So you know, just a couple of things to be thinking of when you're selecting the entity type, and maybe just to cruise forward and preview a bit. You know, there are a number of corporate types of entities that we can choose from: corporations, LLCs, partnerships. Each of them have their own attributes and their own reasons for selection. But some of the primary things you want to be looking at are liability protection and and taxes. A lot of this is tax driven. You know, we want to think about not only, you know, the tax position of the company today, but what it may look like in the future. So, you know, on that, couple points. One is, you know, if you get into a corporation that has not made an S election, and we'll get into what that is, you're going to pay a corporate level tax in addition to taxes on any dollars that are distributed out. There are also some limitations if you have a corporation with an S election, for example, on who the investors can be. So if you're going to bring in you know, different types of investors that are maybe institutional investors or want to invest through an entity, an S corporation is not a good option. Just going on to some other points here. Ease of formation. A lot of these entities, the formation steps are the same. You typically file a document with the Secretary of State. We're in Colorado, so you know Colorado is a good choice in many cases. And you'd file the articles of organization or incorporation, and then you know we'll talk about the agreements that go along with the filing. Let's see here. Do you want to chime in on record keeping requirements, Trent?
Yeah, sure. So record keeping requirements, you know, they differ from the type of entity you choose. And we're going to be referring, just so you guys know, we're going to be referring generally to the corporation as well as the limited liability company model, because that's what we see mostly today that new companies are forming. And in the corporation, it could be either the C corporation or the S corporation. And the only thing different between the C corp and the S corp is how it's treated from a tax perspective. C corp, you pay tax, like Zach mentioned, at the entity level. And then when it's distributed down to the shareholders, they also pay tax. And so the other piece is with the S corporation, it flows through to the shareholders. So there's no corporate entity level tax when you're dealing with an S corp. The limited liability company is also taxed similar to an S corp, where the members, all the income is flowed through to the members, and they filed on their personal income taxes.
For
Yes.
reporting and taxation, how different is it than an S corp and a C corp?
Yeah,
That's a good question. You want to take it now?
I do not deal with B Corps. So to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure how they're taxed. I mean, we predominantly work with corporations that have either made an S election or not, or limited liability companies. But if you're interested in B Corp, there are lawyers, including at our firm, that deal with them.
Yeah. And so with the record keeping requirements, what we get back to is, in order to maintain your liability protection, you need to truly have a company and follow the corporate formalities. So if you're running under a corporation structure, you're going to want to have some minutes where you have annual shareholder meetings or where you have board of director meetings, and those minutes are recorded, just so that you could prove that you truly have a separate legal existence and it's not just some shell entity where you're not dealing with those type of requirements.
So let me just touch on employment taxes. So there's some nuance in the tax code that basically treat an S corp and an LLC differently. So if you're going to form an LLC and you're a member of that LLC, there are some self-employment tax issues that you need to be concerned with. So think about that, and I'm happy to speak with people further about that offline.
Okay. Moving on here, I think I addressed this at the same. So some of the points we're looking at, can the site see oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So we already talked about why you form an entity. You know, protect yourself. Like we said, we see a lot of LLCs and corporations. Don't mix assets between your personal bank account and the company bank account. You want to keep it separate. This all just comes down to the event you're ever sued by a supplier or a customer, or someone wants to make a claim against you. You want to make sure that they make it against the company and not you individually.
Jared, when you say sign contracts on behalf of a company entity as an individual, if I'm a member, there are 3 members of my LLC, and we're all just members. What do I, like, when I actually sign it, do I still sign my name and then below, do I just need to say
Yep.
member, comma?
Yeah.
I mean, what, in practice, what does that look like?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would just say that I think what we're saying here is that the contract itself needs to be in the name of the entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then how the individuals that comprise the company actually sign on behalf of the entity, that depends on the organizational documents of the entity. So if it's manager managed, if there are officers, so an actual human being will be signing the contracts, but it'll be signing on behalf of the entity who will be entering into the contracts.
Yeah. And so, and the last point here is just keep in mind, just because you form a company that will provide you limited liability, it's not the same as having insurance. So we understand, you know, at the early stages, you're not going to be able to afford too much liability insurance, but it's always something to get with an agent, talk to your insurer, and see, you know, what sort of policies you can get in place to protect your business. And then certainly as your company grows, you want to reassess those needs because you may need different types of insurance, you know, from a product liability standpoint, just general commercial liability. Those things are always good to have to ensure that you're protected.
Limited liability just protects you as the owner of the house. Right?
Yeah, because it's, again, if someone wants to make a claim, if you're truly conducting business under a separate entity, they cannot sue you personally and then attach your house.
Statutorily.
So you need personal insurance, you need business insurance.
You need business
You need
insurance.
business insurance, and that's
Absolutely.
and this is and just for the people that are online, the question is how entities protect you from liability, and the answer is that it's a statutory protection, and one point here is that the liabilities consideration is a reason that you really need to be careful about following the corporate formalities, either by statute or in your organizational documents, because one of the things that people try to do when they sue a business and they want to assert the claim against the member is they try to, you know, pierce the so-called corporate veil. And they do that by showing that the entity wasn't really an entity and it was acting as an alter ego of the individual.
It's like paying company bills out of my checking account.
Exactly.
And they can come under me.
Yeah, and then they'd say, well, we don't even need to look at that entity. We're, you know, we're focused on making the claim against this guy.
And that's super important too when you have some personal assets, and your company is very small with very little assets, right? A plaintiff is going to want to try to go after the deeper pockets.
So how does that work for a freelance, for a person doing freelance? Because I know I'm a graphic artist myself. I do freelance graphic art.
Mhm.
So how do you say, okay, well, I may have a separate account, but you know, wouldn't it still be applicable to the person itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was asked, you know, what happens when you're a freelance graphic designer doing the work individually, right? You don't have a separate company set up. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah, you could be personally liable in the event you run into problems.
Or,
So maybe another way to ask you is, if that were the case, let's say you would have someone set up an LLC and just practically, what they should do is have a bank account and they could withdraw those, right? So you do freelance graphic design work, you take a check to your LLC, put it in a separate bank account. You can always withdraw those funds, move them over to your personal account. It's that you need to not be mixing them, right?
That's correct.
That's the key. So it's not that you can't get those and bring them over. It's just that it needs to go in there first, right? And then you can always pull it over as a member draw.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And then you'd want to document that, right? But both from an accounting and a legal perspective, how those dollars are coming out, because those transfers that you're describing from account to account, those may have tax implications depending on how you do it. Let me take this one.
Go for it.
Yeah, so we've alluded to the various corporate types. We've talked about corporations. We've talked about limited liability companies. We're going to focus on those now, drill down with a little more particularity. So from a state law perspective, corporations are corporations. The distinction between a C Corp and an S Corp is a tax distinction. So we're going to refer both to C Corps and S Corps here, but just know that that's not if you went to form a corporation, for example, at the Colorado Secretary of State, you won't see an S Corp option. It's just a corporation from a state law perspective. And if you don't make an S election, it's by default a C Corp. So again, C Corps are taxed both at the corporate level, and dividends or distributions are also taxed. Corporations are creatures of statute, so they're more formal in that the statute provides certain things by default, and as a result, you need less agreements between the members to deal with the corporation because you can simply refer to the statute. They are governed by directors, and sometimes those directors act as a board. Most of us are familiar with boards of directors of corporations. Corporations have shares or stock, and the income allocation is based on ownership of those shares. So if you own shares and the corporation were to distribute dollars out, those dollars would be distributed out on the basis of shares. In a C Corp, you can have multiple layers of shares, preferred, common, and you can have complicated distribution waterfalls. Depending on the state, this is an advantage of Colorado. We don't have a franchise tax in Colorado. You just pay to form the entity. In states like Delaware, depending on how you form that entity, you'll pay a franchise tax based on the authorized number of shares. So just something to keep in mind there. Again, we talked about the double taxation, and it probably should be mentioned that C Corps are often the preferred structure of investors, especially institutional investors, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But oftentimes they just want to know that they have a corporation and it's a C Corp, so that they're not dealing with the pass-through tax treatment. So that's a corp that has not made an S election. LLCs are largely creatures of agreement, so they don't have as detailed a statutory structure. What this means is that the members, and LLCs have members, not shareholders. The members can basically agree to whatever they want, subject to some limitations in the statute. But these agreements are all set forth often in an operating agreement. We'll talk about the operating agreement. So they're very flexible. Their LLCs are either governed by their members, the owners, or managers, and you make that determination when you file the articles of organization with the state of Colorado, for example. You specify whether it's going to be member managed or manager managed. In my experience, most LLCs these days are manager managed, but again, that's something to consider. In an LLC, they're taxed as a partnership. The income losses can be allocated, by contract. So again, great deal of flexibility there. And depending on how you agree upon the allocation of income, the members are going to pay the tax. So you don't pay a corporate level tax. The attributes of tax get flowed up to the members, and you end up paying it on your personal tax return. In my experience, LLCs are becoming increasingly acceptable to investors. There are ways to deal with the tax challenges that LLCs present, and you can work those into your operating agreement in an early stage and facilitate the intake of investors. I think an LLC is an attractive choice for many reasons.
Zach, can I?
Yeah.
This is John Goldstein jumping in here, and I just wanted to reiterate to a certain extent what Zach said, comparing the sort of statutory schemes of that apply to corporations and those that apply to LLCs. There are laws in place in pretty much every state that will apply to just corporations, and another set of laws that will apply just to LLCs. The laws that apply to corporations typically have more sort of affirmative requirements, things you have to do, and that you really cannot opt out of even in your governing documents. Whereas the LLC laws, for example, in Colorado, the Colorado Limited Liability Company Act, those really truly are sort of default sort of rules that you have to play by if you don't address those in your operating agreement. But an operating agreement can preempt those. So that's something to keep in mind to the extent that it will, if you have a corporation, it requires more of an understanding of the statutory scheme.
That's make it like easier to screw up if you do wrong. Safer as from an operational standpoint, it's harder to break it.
Yeah, so the question is, given the fact that that an LLC is a creature of agreement, are they easier to mess up? And I think the answer is we see some interesting structures, I don't know if there are more pitfalls with an LLC than a corporation, because we see some pretty messed up corporations as well. So I think the answer is you can do them both wrong, you can do them both right. I think that in an LLC, there's you can leave a lot more to your imagination. So pros and cons to each.
And I think one point to add there is you can always fix things that are done wrong later on. It just may cost you more to fix something that was done wrong in the early stages later on if you would have done it right in the first place. But pretty much everything is fixable. It just may cost more.
Structure or also the action. Like if you accidentally pierce the corporate wall, can you patch it back up?
So
that one broke.
The liability piece is tough.
That's tough.
I mean, that one you're either going to have it likely or you're not, and it's not that black and white. But from a structural perspective, I mean, we can change almost anything after the fact. There may be tax implications, and of course there's the cost of just doing it. But a decision that you make today, you're not stuck with it forever. You can
amend the contract.
You can amend the operating agreement. You can change from an LLC to a corporation. You can change from a Washington corporation to a Colorado LLC. So we can do all of these things, and nothing's forever.
Yeah.
With actually, this is my next question, which was if you're an LLC and you're taking investment, like I work in a startup and we're a C Corp.
Yeah.
It's really clear, like when we take an investment, like we give them some stock and they give us money.
Yep.
If you're an LLC taking investments, do you just rewrite the agreement to count them in, or do you convert to a C Corp?
No, you can bring money in as an LLC.
Good question.
Yeah, for the people on the online, the question is whether you can bring in investment through an LLC, or do you have to convert to a corporation? And the answer is that you can absolutely raise money in an LLC, and how that process plays out depends on what the operating agreement says and what the investor requirements are. So oftentimes it's negotiated at that point in time, and you'd put in place often an amended and restated operating agreement that would have all the terms that they would that they want and that you've negotiated with them. Sometimes they're willing to come in and just pay dollars, and you issue units or membership interests that you already have and that you've already provided for in the agreement, and that's great. Nothing else is needed then.
So you can structure an LLC to make it more friendly to investment if it's built such that it allows people to come in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just like a corporation, I mean, you need to deal with with all the securities laws. So there are both state law and federal law issues that you need to deal with when you're selling securities and taking people's money. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I think we're up front with our new clients when they're coming in. We want to ask them, what are you thinking about doing from a fundraising perspective? Because we try to put a more robust operating agreement in place. So then when they do go out to, say, accredited investors and try to raise money, those operating agreements generally look good to those type of seed investors, angel investors. Now, certain institutional investors, venture capitalists will not go into LLCs. They like the C Corp structure. I guess maybe that's why, the startup you work for is a C Corp. Many programs like incubators and entrepreneurship programs where they're, bringing young companies through those programs, they require them to actually form a C Corp as part of the program. So sometimes you just don't have the choice when you're coming out of those type of things.
When I think LLC, I think small business, it's not going to take investment. When I think a loan, when I think C Corp, I think, so you're going to sell stock. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's not always true, but yeah.
Just as a point of emphasis in context, we all, with Blair Hill was yesterday, and they were talking about intellectual property, especially on patents. The message was, you can mess up things that you can't fix later. So just for people listening online, as you said, there's
Yeah.
there's always a cost to fix it, but if they were listening yesterday,
Yeah.
again, a point of emphasis that it probably is a little bit different than some of those intellectual property things that it may cost you, but you can fix some of those things. From a business formation.
Yep, it's a good clarification. So the point from the floor is that in addition to tax implications, there may also be intellectual property implications that can't be changed once you make a decision.
Yep.
And I would add to that pretty much any filing that you make with a governmental entity, right? I think for the types of businesses that we're talking about, those are probably the two, but there may be others as well.
Yeah. And I think you were maybe mentioning from the patent protection
Yeah,
perspective.
They were speaking specifically to patents, so I just wanted to,
Yeah.
if someone was listening yesterday, today, to just think about those two things differently.
No, fair enough. Yeah, from a patent perspective, if you have an invention and you're out selling it and you didn't get it filing within a certain amount of time, that's done. Yeah, you can't go out unless there's improvements and things like that. But no, that's a good point. Thank you.
I'm just going to touch momentarily on S Corp here. We'll just blow through this, but again, it's another option. It provides pass-through taxation and a corporation structure. You need to make an S election with the IRS. You have a limited amount of time to do that, so pay attention to those filing requirements. And in our experience, it's not a great option for kind of traditional tech type fundraising. So it's a good entity type for a lot of businesses.
My question would be, what is pass-through taxation?
Yeah, so pass-through taxation is that the entity itself doesn't pay tax at the corporate level. Instead, the attributes of tax flow up to the members or shareholders of the entity, and you pay the tax on income, for example, as a member on your personal tax return. So it saves a layer of tax. Okay, and then there are other entity types as well.
Do you want to talk a little bit, John, about not filing an S election?
Oh.
Just some people get concerned that if there's certain requirements. I'll let John jump in here real quick.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so in S election, it is something to keep in mind if you are forming a corporation and you do need to, you want to make that. Just be mindful. You have to do it within a limited amount of time, as Zach said. It's 75 days from the day of formation, or within 75 days of the start of the tax year for which you want to make that. Although the IRS has become sort of increasingly lenient on this, if you do miss that filing, you can make it later, as long as you give sort of provide them reasonable cause for why you missed it. The form's pretty straightforward, but it is good to keep in mind that you will need signatures from all your shareholders on that form. So it does depend. If you have a lot of investors, that could be an administrative hassle.
Thanks, John. Okay, we'll move a little bit. I know we're running short of time here, and we want to definitely leave some time for some questions. Just keep looking at the formation process. We pretty much touched on all this stuff. First, you got to determine your state. We deal a lot, being a Colorado law firm, we see a lot of Colorado LLCs, a lot of Colorado corporations, but Delaware is also a very popular state just because it has such a robust body of corporate law. And so pretty much every issue has been litigated in the state of Delaware. So, right? Yeah, so there are a ton of Delaware corporations for that reason. So, a lot of our clients do choose Delaware, but we do see Colorado, especially from the LLC.
And again, nothing's final here. So you can start in Colorado and redomesticate to Delaware should that eventuality ever arise.
Right. And if you are a Delaware corporation doing business in Colorado, you do need to register with Secretary of State as a foreign corporation to do business here.
I'm asking a lot of the questions, but I'll ask this one too. We saw a bunch of different mechanisms there. Like, if you just want something quick to establish something so you can then convert it later, what's usually the best one, the simplest one to start with?
I would probably, ease of formation and just, dealing with it, I would probably lean towards an LLC, but, a lot to take into account.
Okay, I'm gonna skip through here. Again, we'll get into, so the LLC's governed by an operating agreement, corporations governed by its articles, as well as bylaws. But there are other agreements that the shareholders of the corporation should consider.
So, and just a point of clarification here, you file either the articles or the certificate, it's called different things in different states, with the Secretary of State to actually form the entity. And then what we're talking about now is the agreement among the members that talk about things like governance, buy, sell, all the side agreements. That's what's set forth in these agreements that we're going to talk about.
Yep, go for it.
So LLCs have operating agreements, and here's the list of things that they often address. Management, is it going to be a board of managers? Is it going to be a single manager? A great deal of flexibility there, but it needs to be covered. Capital contributions. What are the particular members putting into the business? Is it cash? Is it contribution by way of development or services? IP. These need to be described. Distributions. So once the company is actually in a position where it's making money and has profits to distribute, how are you going to distribute it to the members? Important considerations here. How are you going to onboard additional members? Are you going to allow additional members? Is it just going to be the founders and that's it, or are you going to provide for how you're going to bring in new people? If you're going to bring in new people, you should probably describe how you're going to do that. Transfer restrictions and protective provisions. So once you have these membership units, there's not a market for them out there in these small businesses. You can't go to the stock exchange and sell your units. So you have to talk about and think about how people are going to get out of the business. You may say you can't transfer your units at all. That's fine. That just pushes the discussion down the road. Protective provisions are things that protect the minority shareholders. So, for example, if one of them is often a preemptive right. So if a company is going to offer shares to a third party, it's got to offer them to the existing members first, and they get a bite at the apple so that they don't get diluted. Buy-sell provisions. So in many of these businesses that I think would be relevant here, the members are also going to be probably working for the business. So you want to think about what happens if things aren't going well on the employment front. Do they get to keep their membership interests? Does the company get to buy them out? Do you get to kick them out? Likewise, what happens if it's another third-party issue. You have someone that wants to buy your units. Can you sell them? Do you have to offer them to everyone else in the company first? These are the sorts of things that are covered in operating agreements. Fiduciary duties, the people that are actually conducting the business, officers, managers, do they have fiduciary duties to the business, or are you going to waive those back as far as possible? And then conflicts of interest. In a corporation, it's statutory how conflicts are dealt with in many cases. In an LLC, you need to provide for what the company can do and when can it do it. Shareholder agreements, again, a lot more is left to the act, to the code in the corporate context. But they're often shareholder agreements. They cover some similar things in an operating agreement. Voting rights, we talked about buy-sell agreements. It's very similar whether you're in a corp or an LLC. Transfer restrictions and protective provisions. So these things that we just discussed, they go into a shareholder agreement rather than an operating agreement. But many of the provisions are similar.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just to elaborate on what Zach was just mentioning, we have actually a couple issues going on right now for two different clients where one of the early founders, they were really, they were the technology person. They developed all the IP for this particular company. Now the company's technology is pretty outdated, and one of the owners now wants to leave the company and go do something else because he has some better ideas. The problem is their formation documentation, their operating agreement didn't cover how this person could sell to the other partners and get out, or how they may be able to sell to maybe a strategic buyer. And his other partners, they don't want to leave the company. They love it. They want to keep it. They don't want to sell it. And so now this guy's stuck in a company that he doesn't want to be in, and we're trying to figure a way to get him out. And we have a very similar situation, not a tech company, but it's a physician's practice where this woman's stuck in her practice and can't retire. So these things are, it's good to think about these things up front, but as the company grows, you want to think about all these things every couple of years or so to make sure everyone's protected. And then just, thinking about things, costs an issue. Obviously, a Delaware corporation is going to be more expensive from a filing fee perspective than here in Colorado.
Well, the other thing worth mentioning there is if you incorporate in a jurisdiction other than where you're physically located, you're going to have to pay someone to be a registered agent. And that's an additional fee that you're going to have to pay annually. So if you're in Colorado and you form in Colorado, that's something that you won't have to deal with. You can serve as your own registered agent in this state. There's no need to pay a third party annual fees for that.
Absolutely. Choosing your corporate or limited liability company name is also something you'll need to think about pretty early on. You can't have the exact same name as someone else that's already registered at the Colorado Secretary of State, for instance. If you're going to form a Colorado Corp or a Colorado limited liability company, you have to have something different than what's already on the register. So it's something that may be something to be thinking about is, what your name's going to be.
Can I just add one quick thing to that? And Trent, you can talk about this more, but if your business model relies on some sort of product line down the road, you probably want to make sure that that name's not trademarked or protected, so that if you want the name of your company to be consistent with whatever your product line would be.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Wilmer guys addressed that yesterday. Funding options. One of you guys want?
Yeah, I think we talked about that a bit. Obviously you want to pick your entity type to work with what you have planned from a fundraising perspective. So, think about how you're going to grow your business, and that informs, the type of entity that you're going to choose.
Yep. Intellectual property has already been covered. Make sure it's signed to the company, properly contributed. It's in the company's name, especially if you're going to go out and get fundraising. Investors are going to want to make sure that the IP is properly within that entity that they're investing in. Employment issues, don't really have time to go into those, but does it make sense to hire employees when you're an early stage company, or does it make more sense to go the independent contractor route to the extent that's available to you? There are issues with that, though.
Just be clear what you're doing. If you have employees, document them as employees. If you have independent contractors, document them like independent contractors, and make sure you understand in what capacity different people are doing different things. In these small businesses, oftentimes, people are wearing different hats, and you just need to be aware of what hat people are wearing and when.
And then exit strategies is the last bullet point there. Kind of goes back to the point I was making earlier. Make sure you have some documents in place that can, if the company's coming along, if there's someone else that wants to buy the company, make sure there's agreements that will help the founders figure out, when they're going to be able to sell and when they're not. You always want to be able to exit from the company, and generally you want to put those terms in place before you have someone willing to buy your company at that point, because you may have someone who just wants to keep building the company and they don't want to sell. If you have provisions in place where you could drag them along with you through the sale, things like that, that may be beneficial to you.
Yeah, and we're looking way down the, way into the future here. But I would also say that, when you're contemplating a structure, all these things that we just discussed, corporate documentation, operating agreements, minutes in a corporation, meeting minutes, all these things count. And hopefully you've established a, kind of a corporate record that someone can look at as a buyer and understand what's happened, because that, if you don't have that, I would say that it detracts from the value of a business in the context of a sale. So the things that we just discussed are not only important for purposes of, growing and running the business, but also for selling a business to a third party down the road.
Good point. I think we're out of time, guys, but we have some time for some questions. I don't know if there are any from the folks viewing remotely, but
We have answered the ones that have come in so far.
okay, great.
I'm gonna have a call, so maybe wait 30 seconds.
Ask you a question. So, you know, if you, especially when you're starting out, you know, lean is the, you know, the way to go these days. And so people are told to not spend money. It can be a little intimidating, you know, to go have an attorney help you with these things. Not that I'm asking you guys to make your pitch, but you know, what could that look like if they came to Data Scrum and Subs and said, can you just help me get like just the basics to get going? What does that look like, and how can you just help someone with perspective on how to prioritize that, especially early on when you may be bootstrapping and you're trying to be really.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the question was, for those of you remotely who didn't hear it, you know, what can we give, you know, if you want to run lean at the very beginning, taking care of legal things is the last priority, obviously. For most entrepreneurs, it's about developing your product, getting it to the marketplace. So we totally get that. And so is there some sort of an arrangement that we offer or other firms offer to young companies, early stage startup companies, to just get them the basics of what they need to get their company formed and going? And we do have, it really depends on the company, but we do offer startup packages, in particular at our firm, to early stage companies, to give them the nuts and bolts. And whether it's a C Corp, you know, get them all the necessary documents to get those in place. Generally, we'd like to get them, you know, like confidentiality agreements that they have that they could use. You know, maybe there's employment agreement if they have officers they're hiring, things like that. We just kind of have a checklist of kind of the important things you should be thinking about at the early stages. And when we offer discounted packages to those folks, depending on, you know, what they truly need. And but I think, you know, that's becoming more and more common these days, where you could just put together packages and tailor them to the needs of each company and do that at a pretty minimal cost.
And I would say, even if you're not going to use a lawyer to prepare documents, it's probably helpful to just have a discussion up front as to entity selection and other planning points. And that way, you know, at least you're, you know, headed in a direction that, you know, probably makes sense. So we're happy to have those discussions early on. We're happy to, you know, do as much or as little as needed or as wanted, and we can, you know, often do it on a fee basis that makes sense for both sides, taking into account the size of the business and the particular needs. Absolutely.
Can I just add to that real quick? I mean, I think it helps to, you know, make decisions and then sort of stick with them too. So, you know, have the discussion with the lawyer, decide if you're going to go the LLC route or the corporation route. And what, you know, and once you start down that road, it gets a lot more costly when you sort of change your mind during that process. You know, we've already prepared an operating agreement, and now, okay, now we want to be a corporation, and that can just double the cost pretty easily.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any others?
Sorry. I just want to remind everyone, this is Andrew again. We've got the sheet that these guys put together for us. There's printed copies at each location. They're also in Waffle. They're one of the early cards in Waffle, so we've got access to quite a bit of what they covered today is in there, as well as, I believe, the link to your website, I believe, was on there.
Yeah, it's our startup site.
Yeah, that Trent referred to earlier. And here in Denver, they're gonna be in the room next door for a few minutes. And if you're out there at one of the other locations and you want to get in touch with them, reach out in the legal Slack channel, and we'll connect you guys so that you can get any one-on-one questions answered. Because as they'll say, there's always, you know, the answers are always a little bit different depending on your situation. So we want to make sure that you all get any specific questions answered. And just want to thank you all again. We really appreciate your time coming here and being with us and helping provide some extra value. So,
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank
thank you very much, guys. Somebody shut this down.
Thank you.